5 metres long, $6.
Epic.
Goodness gracious, not for my home, that's for sure. Alexi Russell, Andrew Hargood, kia ora to you both. Thanks for being on the program, appreciate it.
Thanks, Willis. Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, the Prime Minister cracks the drawbridge on Fortress New Zealand. Some businesses will fly solo, isolating at home after overseas travel as part of a trial. Countries will all get risk ratings that will also shape MIQ requirements. And the phased rollout of the new normal should go live by next March. But it all rests on ramping up the vaccination rollout. We'll dig deep into the detail and have reaction. Ports of Auckland is charged over the death of one of its workers. What next for leaky homeowners after the door closes on their class action? And the new bark and ride. Fur babies all aboard the Wellington cable car. Catch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5, I'm Marama Tipole. The government's plan to begin reopening the borders will start with a trial of home isolation or shorter MIQ stays for a select number of travellers. The vaccination program will also be fast-tracked to allow those aged 16 and over to book their first jab from September the 1st. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says people only need to look at other countries to realise how devastating COVID-19 can be.
If New Zealand had been hit as hard as the UK or US, it's estimated nearly 10,000 Kiwis would have died. That's the population of Te Puke.
Jacinda Ardern says a small group of vaccinated travellers will take part in the quarantine trial between October and December this year. Tourism operators say the reopening of the border shouldn't be rushed despite preparing for more tough months without international visitors. The new border system is based on low, medium and high risk entry paths into the country and kicks in from early 2022. Te Puia Chief Executive Tim Cossa isn't surprised by the border reopening timeframe.
I'm pretty comfortable that the position is keep us safe, get us all vaccinated as best we can, and then start to open ourselves up to the world as we progressively go forward, but don't do it in a rush. Do it as a progressive thing, carefully manage it and carefully manage the rebuild of tourism, really.
Tim Cossa says he predicts it will take some time for travel confidence to rebuild. Two small electricity retailers have lodged a formal complaint with the industry regulator about Monday night's power blackouts. Electric Kiwi and Haast Energy say big generators Genesis and Contact abused their market dominance by not providing enough power to meet demand. Several lines companies were ordered to cut supply by grid operator Transpower, resulting in thousands of households suffering blackouts. The small companies want the Electricity Authority to declare an undesirable trading situation and reset wholesale prices for Monday night. Genesis has said it wasn't given enough warning of record demand to fire up a third unit at its Huntly station. A Wellington midwife is pleading for the government to give DHBs the desperately needed resource to ease terrible working conditions in her profession. About 150 midwives and supporters marched to Parliament today, with midwives walking off the job in Wellington, Nelson and Marlborough as part of rolling nationwide strike action this week. This midwife, who RNZ has agreed not to name, says work conditions are unbearable.
It's killing me. I'm so stressed. I'm so close to burning out. I'm almost in tears talking about it. We are short-staffed all the time. I hardly ever get a break. I used to do 12-hour shifts.
The midwife says the DHB's latest pay offer is insulting. Maritime New Zealand has laid charges against the ports of Auckland over the death of a port worker almost a year ago. Pala'amo Kalati was killed last August after being crushed when a container was dropped during a lifting operation. Charges have been laid against the port company in the Auckland District Court today under the Health and Safety at Work Act. An individual has also been charged. Christchurch City Councillors are being told some residents feel let down by the decision to cut the number of seats in the city's new stadium. Councillors are making a final decision on the stadium size today. They were today presented with a 24,000 signature petition backing a larger 30,000 seat stadium. Petition organiser Rob Hoff says residents were promised a large venue that could hold major rugby matches.
I'm here to give those 24,000 people a voice that says they want 30,000 seats. Many of them are upset and angry at this decision. These people were promised something and they feel like they've been given a raw deal.
A majority of councillors made a preliminary decision last month to reduce the stadium's capacity to 25,000. It's 5:04. To sports now, the All Blacks have rejigged their backline to bring in Will Jordan on the wing for the second Bledisloe Cup test in Auckland on Saturday. With midfielder Anton Linnette-Brown out with a knee injury, Rieko Ioane has moved from wing to centre. TJ Perenara comes in as a backup halfback in place of Brad Weber and the only change to the reserves. The All Blacks coach Ian Foster says there is focus on mental health and not prioritising week-to-week selection.
Selection's tough. And ultimately, if everyone's focus is purely on selection, then there is a sense of success and failure each week. You know, we try to make sure we're giving huge value to the squad, to the work that goes on from the players who aren't playing.
The Wallabies have recalled winger Marika Koroibete, who missed the opening test due to suspension due to a late-night drinking incident. He's one of 4 changes to the starting 15, which lost the first test. Meanwhile, Highlanders co-captain Ash Dixon is leaving New Zealand rugby at the end of the year to take up a contract in Japan. The Northern Mystics defender Kate Burley is leaving the ANZ Premiership winning side, having signed with the Southern Steel. Burley was named in the Silver Ferns development squad earlier this week. And in the European Super Cup between the Champions League holders and the Europa League winners, Chelsea have beaten Villarreal 6-5 in a penalty shootout. That's the news.
A border balancing act.
If you do this badly, everyone is affected. We need to do this well and we need to do it right.
Rudy Giuliani sells his message.
Hello to the people of Auckland, New Zealand. I've been there. Anytime you want to invite me back, I'll be there.
You have been warned.
And a great album celebrated.
Because there's so much music available today, they'll forgive you if you listen to something else.
Who are you listening to? Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday, Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Partly cloudy with isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine, a few showers for tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough, Nelson, Canterbury Plains and Christchurch. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers for tonight. A period of rain tomorrow morning, then scattered showers, however, becoming fine in Nelson and Canterbury. Bulla and Westland, showers turning to rain this evening with heavy falls. Rain easing to showers early tomorrow. Canterbury High Country, Otago and Southland, cloudy today with rain this evening and severe northwest gales in exposed places, but becoming fine tomorrow. For Fiordland, periods of rain, heavy for a time today. Severe northwest gales in exposed places easing this evening. And for our friends in the Chatham Islands, mainly fine with rain later tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Kia ora rā marama. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A roadmap for reopening, but it's a long road with plenty of potential potholes along the way. The government's unveiled a plan it says will see the border reopen to some countries under some conditions sometime next year. The plan includes a new approach to letting in travellers, with a trial allowing some to self-isolate at home rather than in a managed isolation hotel. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
As the world wages war on COVID-19, Fortress New Zealand has put up its walls and kept the enemy at bay. It's kept Kiwis safe, but it's brought its hardships too.
Family and friends being separated, industries accessing skilled employment, or Kiwis just missing that personal sense of connection. It's just one of the reasons that I believe that this year has felt so hard.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, today seeking to lift that burden, unveiling the government's plan to ease down the drawbridge while keeping up its defences.
In 2020, we knew what we had to do. In 2021, we want to know that things will get back to normal eventually.
But normal will not look like it used to. From early next year, 3 pathways into the country will be defined, an effective traffic light system. There's the red light. That's all unvaccinated travellers and anyone coming from a high-risk country. They'll still have to spend a full 14 days in MIQ as they do now. At the other end of the spectrum, the green light. That's vaccinated travellers from low-risk countries who will be allowed to skip quarantine altogether. In the middle falls a new approach for New Zealand, the yellow light for those coming from medium-risk countries.
That means if you've been to a country where there is COVID but pretty decent rates of vaccination and you yourself are vaccinated, rather than going into MIQ in the standard way we do now, we'll be looking into either isolation at home and or shortened isolation periods.
The approach will be trialled on a very small scale from October with very tight controls, but already some are nervous. Both the Greens and National have questions.
The whole reason for MIQ was because it wasn't deemed to be completely safe to self-isolate. So we've got some concerns.
That's one where we need more details. How exactly will it work? How will the trial operate? Who will be selected? And so I think we need to know a bit more about it before we can come to a definitive judgment on it.
There is no room for error in the next 6 months, so we simply will not take risks that we are not absolutely convinced that we can manage.
The grand reopening is chiefly dependent on one thing, and that's vaccination rates. New Zealand has thus far lagged behind the rest of the world. A roll call of assembled experts today brought a united call.
Clearly the answer is vaccinate.
Yeah, it's all about vaccination.
Get vaccinated. Clearly it's about vaccination.
Get vaccinated.
To help with the process, the government is speeding up its end of the campaign. From the start of September, everyone over the age of 16 will be able to book a dose. The current 3-week wait between jabs has been doubled to 6 weeks, in line with some research suggesting marginally better protection. Professor David Skegg advised the government's response. He recommended against setting a target.
We should be aiming to get as near as possible to 100%.
We want as many people as possible to be vaccinated.
There won't be a percentage then, which triggers the reopening. There won't be a ribbon cutting. Instead, the government will monitor a range of factors, including the vaccination rates across regions and more vulnerable communities. They hope to push go before the end of March.
My hope is next year things will start to get just that bit easier, that bit more secure.
It's a hope most New Zealanders have, but one that still feels a long way away.
Government COVID-19 business advisor Rob Fife reckons more relaxed border restrictions now all ride on New Zealand achieving high vaccination rates. And he says while the government scores about an 8 when it comes to good intentions in that department, delivery so far is about a 5.
I'm disappointed, yes. Having said that, I think it's the right decision by the government.
Why are you disappointed then if you think it's the right decision?
When I made that, well, I'm not sure call it prediction, when I expressed that ambition, it was before Delta took hold. And I look at what's happened since Delta took hold. You know, I used to look across the Tasman and admire how developed the New South Wales contact tracing system was. And they've demonstrated to us that was completely inadequate to keep up with this new variant. And if it gets into New Zealand, we will also struggle to contain it. We'll have no choice but to go direct into I suspect, a level 4 lockdown. And if that's the alternative, I'd prefer to wait a month or two until we had our vaccine rollout complete before starting to open the borders.
Rob, is business in any better position today compared to where it was at yesterday?
In my view, yes. There were I thought some really significant parts of today's announcement that I took some heart in. The government and the Prime Minister clearly expressed a desire and an intent to open the borders once everyone in New Zealand has been offered the chance to be vaccinated. And I found that really encouraging. We haven't had that level of clarity previously. They were also clear in saying their intent is to do that in the first quarter. I mean, there's a risk. I mean, if whatever My expectation is by the time we get to the first quarter, we won't be talking about Delta anymore. There'll be some new variant, and we don't know the characteristics of that variant yet, so there's always risk. But I thought that was encouraging. I thought the government responding to the high level of frustration there is around being able to get people into MIQ and therefore not just into the country but out of the country so that they can come back in. I think that they've listened to that noise and this plan to trial isolation at home is a plus. And then there's signalling of these three pathways which says moving into next year, people that are vaccinated will be able to move across the border without going into managed isolation. I think all of those things are very positive, and I understand why they're not putting specific dates and targets, because this virus keeps evolving in ways that we can't predict, and I think most of the people I've spoken to since this morning are accepting of that reality.
You are yourself one of the business people who's been slightly frustrated by the MIQ process. Now, this trial begins in October, right, for businesses only, and the government is looking for expressions of interest. Do you want to get in on that trial?
Well, interestingly, I have a board meeting in Canada in Montreal in November, and it'll be our first in-person board meeting since February last year. I need to attend that board meeting in person. I'll end up going to that board meeting. I'd love to get in on this trial on the way back, but if I can't, then I'll need to remain offshore until I can get an MIQ slot, because I have to go to that board meeting. That's just the reality of continuing to be a member of that board.
It's exhausting, isn't it? I mean, you're a high-energy person, and even you sound exhausted by the prospects of all of this.
It is exhausting. I mean, we all like certainty in our lives. It's not just business people. I think everyone in the community, we struggle with uncertainty. We find that drains our energy. It creates anxieties. It creates frustrations and unmet expectations and so on. Sadly, that's one of the consequences of this pandemic. And as I say, it's something that we have to adapt to. I'm very conscious of the people around me and the people I work with, of ensuring that we do everything we can to support their energy levels, their mental health, and make sure the stress is not becoming a problem for people. Am I looking forward? I'm energised actually by I start to see some light at the end of the tunnel. I can see now the direction of travel in the pathway, but it's no walk in the park, that's for sure.
But you're hopeful.
I am hopeful, and I've been optimistic all the way through this. I mean, I know, who'd want to be a politician? You just can't win. I think on balance, we have done a very good job, and the challenge with this virus is it keeps presenting us with unexpected deviations and variations and consequences, and there's constantly new science coming to the fore. So politicians are having to make decisions all the time, trying to anticipate how this path is going to unfold. And I think here we've got it, for the most part, pretty right. I would have loved to have seen our vaccine rolled out faster, but then again, I'm thrilled we chose to focus on Pfizer and get everyone vaccinated with Pfizer. And that came kind of at a cost of time. Was that a good or bad decision? It's kind of easy in retrospect to unpick it, but at the time it looked like a really good decision to me, for example.
Are you confident we're actually going to meet those targets of having everyone who wants a jab getting it by the end of the year? I think the intent is really strong. I think Yeah, but intent is not delivery, is it, Rob?
Sure. So that's exactly where my sentence was going to go. So the intent is really strong. I'd rate our intent and our kind of strategy at an 8, probably out of 10. I think our execution has probably been a 5 or 6 out of 10, and I think we need to nail this next phase.
And that was Rob Fyfe. It is 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, for more on the government's roadmap to reopening, the COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, joins me now. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Good afternoon.
So Rob Fife there saying, in terms of intentions with vaccine delivery, government gets an 8. In his view, you're kind of sitting around a 5 in terms of delivery. Are you positive you can maximise that vaccine rollout to get everyone who wants to be done by December?
Well, I think the biggest thing that's held back delivery has been supply of the vaccine. And at the moment, we're in a position where we've got a plentiful supply of vaccine coming in now. And so you're seeing the vaccine campaign really ramping up as we said it would. We'd spent a lot of time planning while vaccine supply was scarce for what we would do once vaccines started coming in bigger numbers. And that's why you're seeing people being able to book in very quickly and the system's operating incredibly efficiently.
So just looking at your numbers, we did some rough calculations, right? You would need to vaccinate around 300,000 people a week, 43,000 people a day, including weekends, in order to get that target, not counting under 16s in that. So can you really crank up if you bring young people in too?
Oh, so we did just under 50,000 a day yesterday, and we are seeing the daily numbers delivered trending upwards. And we will see bigger numbers than that during the week. Yes, we see lower numbers in the weekend, but things like the mass vaccination events, and we've got a model there that will work, it'll add to the numbers, as will worksite vaccinations. So they're not included in the DHB numbers. So I'm confident that we will be able to give every New Zealander the opportunity to have both of their shots by the end of the year.
So repeatedly today it was said adjusting the border will only happen, quote, once enough people are vaccinated, unquote. How do we know what enough is? Because you won't set an actual number target. So can you tell us specifically what enough is so that we know when we've reached it?
Well, we want everyone to take up the opportunity to get the vaccine. I don't want, and we've always been clear on this, and the epidemiologists spoke about this today as well, setting a numerical target and accepting anything less than everybody who's eligible taking up
But
the
you know
vaccine.
everybody's not going to take it up, Minister, so how will the public know that you're honouring your promises to us because we don't know what enough is by your definition?
Well, the commitment that we've made is that everyone will have the opportunity to get one, and that is exactly what we will deliver between now and Christmas. So everyone, other than, unless they're excluded because of age, and there's still some uncertainty as to how low that age band may go between now and the end of the year, but everyone who's eligible will have the opportunity to get one.
OK, well, let's look at it in a different way. There will always be a minority who won't get vaccinated. They'll choose not to be vaccinated. So at what point does the minority stop dictating policy for the majority?
So we've indicated that in the first quarter of next year, there will be change in the way we manage our border, and that will include some different settings that potentially increase the risk to us as a country, and we have to start doing that. We can't wait for people who are indicating that they aren't going to take up the opportunity to be vaccinated. We can't wait for them indefinitely. We need to give them a reasonable opportunity to learn about the vaccine, to get vaccinated, but we're not going to be able to stay in the position that we're in now indefinitely.
So, Minister, are you saying by March, regardless of how many unvaccinated people there are in the country, you're pushing ahead with opening the borders, or other things being equal?
What I'm saying is that the borders will start to change in the first part of next year, and the way we manage the border will start to change. And that will include not everybody going through MIQ for the full 14 days when they arrive in the country, more of a risk-based framework to who can travel more easily, and things will change at the border. And, we have to start making changes at the border next year. We can't stay the way we are indefinitely. We know that the next few months, if anything, we need to be as tight as possible at the border to reduce the risk while we're still going through the vaccination campaign. But early next year, things start to change.
There's lots to crack through, so let's do some of this quickly. So the pilot scheme to test home isolation or shorter MIQs, you're allowing businesses to apply to be part of that. Who decides who gets in?
There'll be an expression of interest process, and then there'll be a criteria, and we'll publish all of that. The applications will be ranked against the criteria, and then a selection will take place. That'll be done by Health, the Ministry of Health. They'll have a team there working their way through that. They'll select the strongest bids from the expression of interest for a pilot, because it is a pilot program.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister says there'll be strict conditions. You'll have to be fully vaccinated. How are you going to manage and monitor compliance? Will you put bracelets on them?
One of the things that we'll work through, and this will actually be part of the expression of interest process, are the enforcement measures. So is it digitally monitored? Ankle bracelets, I guess, are the other sort of extreme end of that. There are other digital tools available, but what sort of monitoring would be around that? That'll all be part of the discussions with those businesses.
Professor Skeggs suggested you monitor EFTPOS receipts. Will you go that far?
I wouldn't rule that out either. So one of the things that we'll be asking through the expression of interest process is for businesses to present us with an isolation plan. And one of the things that we'll look at that is it strong enough? Is the monitoring and enforcement strong enough? Are we confident in it? Are there additional things we could do to strengthen that? We'll have those discussions with those businesses.
The Prime Minister indicated shared, ventilation would rule people out, that you can't be anywhere where your family is. So is this a scheme for privileged people with second houses and financial means?
No, not necessarily, although there will sort of be a demographic aspect to the first group of people who will be eligible for this. But unfortunately, it's a risk-based framework. So the people who are lowest risk are the people who can isolate away from everybody else.
If it works and you go wider with this, how much is it going to cost for people to isolate at home? Because presumably there'll be compliance and monitoring costs.
That's right, and so that's one of the things that the trial will tell us. There are some cheap technological solutions available. Things like electronic monitoring don't need to cost anywhere near as much as they used to, and so we'll have the opportunity to work through that over the next few months.
And assuming that someone's coming back from a low-risk country, will you have the resources to offer it to everyone who wants it, or will they have to apply for it?
Oh, look, we're talking, that's next year. We haven't made those decisions yet. At this point, we're talking about a trial, and we'll take the lessons from that trial and decide how we can then apply those to others.
Could the All Blacks be part of the trial?
Look, to be honest, that's not something we've looked at yet.
But if if they're employed by a company, which they are, presumably they could express interest. You wouldn't rule them out.
Well, we have at the moment for sports teams who are training, we actually have some specific arrangements for them that allow them to do some things while they're training, while they're in MIQ, that others aren't allowed to do. So it could be that we do end up with a custom solution for them that we negotiate with them.
So first quarter, you're going to move to this risk-based border setting, right? So countries will be categorised. Give us it in a nutshell, how you will determine what category a country falls into in terms of their risk profile.
Quite a big range of factors. It'll include the number of daily cases that we're seeing in that country relative to their population, the vaccination rates within that population, how porous their borders are, so how big a risk is there that COVID-19 cases from other nearby countries might be coming into them. That'll be a factor. Number of people who travel from that country to New Zealand and are likely to travel from that country to New Zealand, that will certainly be a factor. The confidence in their testing regime. So we've got a number of countries where they're not picking up large numbers of COVID-19 cases, but that's because they're not testing very much. And so we'll look at all of those things.
So, Minister, when I hear you say that and I look at the countries right now, outside of the Cooks and Niue, all jokes aside, which countries are low risk then?
Look, there are countries around the Pacific that are low risk, but the situation...
Would the UK and the US qualify as low risk, which are big trading partners and places we'd want to go to from a business sense and probably for connections, family connections too? Would they be low risk?
Well, one of the factors that we'll look at, in addition to all the ones I just mentioned, is the likelihood of someone coming in, bringing COVID-19 with them, because there can be other protective measures that you can put in place, including having people isolating before they leave the country and things like that. There are other protective measures that we might be able to put in place there. So we haven't set some hard and fast rules yet, and the country risk assessment now, as of today, is likely to be different in a couple of months' time.
So you're going to have to be able to prove your vaccination status for all of the things that you're talking about. How far along the line are you with a vaccination certificate, a digital passport or some kind of medical passport? Where are we at with that? How far from completion?
We know that our COVID-19 immunisation register is going to give us a really good tool for New Zealanders to be able to digitally eventually link that record to whatever the digital vaccine or digital health passport is. So we're well positioned here. What we've got to do is continue to work with airlines and others to make sure that we've got a good system coming the other way. So if someone's been vaccinated and been tested in another country, can we access that data? Can we have confidence in that data, preferably electronically rather than on paper, because that's more verifiable, it's more robust.
Our IT's let us down in the past though, Minister. How confident are you that you'll have this up and running by March next year, which is when you're saying we'll be allowed to travel more freely?
Well, most passports now have have chips in them, and we read them digitally. They store information digitally. There are systems in place. We need to extend those systems to include health information.
Thanks for your time this evening. That is the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins there. Homai o whakaro, love your feedback on that one. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Self-isolation is what I want to hear from. Which travellers do you reckon should be allowed to self-isolate at home? Would you qualify for the pilot study that the government is talking about now? And what would you be prepared to pay to stay at home and self-isolate? Pātui mai, text me on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 28 minutes past 5. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Charges have been filed against Ports of Auckland over the death of one of its workers. Maritime New Zealand has charged the port in relation to Pala Amo-Kalati's death in August last year. Ko taku hoa e nei ko Nita Blake Person. Kia ora, Nita. Can you remind us what the details of this case are?
It's been nearly a year since Pala Amo-Kalati was killed. August 30th last year, he was working at the Ports of Auckland as a lasher, and those are the people who secure those massive containers coming on and off the shifts. And around 2:15 in the morning, one of those big containers toppled and crushed and killed Pala Amo-Kalati, which was devastating for his family. Obviously, he's got 7 kids, but devastating also for his Ports of Auckland colleagues. It was the third death linked to the ports in 3 years, and we've spoken to ports workers who were there in the hours and the days afterwards, who said that they were told to go back to work really quickly after this incident happened. So Maritime NZ then launched an investigation into the circumstances of that death. It would have been work safe had it been on land, but because of where it was on the ports, Maritime NZ investigated. This death was the one which sparked the big safety inquiry by Auckland Council. Mayor Phil Goff at the time was really concerned after Mr Kalati's death about what was happening down there. So there was that independent inquiry which was then undertaken and revealed huge safety concerns and major worries with how management was running the place.
Nita, what do we know about what exactly the port has been charged with?
So we know that there's about 5 charges. An individual has been charged as well as the Ports of Auckland. We don't know who that individual is. The papers have yet to be filed, and it's possible they may get name suppression. But these are all health and safety charges, and some of them range with pretty big consequences. Just referring to my notes here, some of them an offence of reckless conduct in respect of a health and safety duty, an offence of failing to comply with a duty that exposes an individual to the risk of death, and these are carrying maximum penalties of fines up to $3 million, $1.5 million. So they're very serious charges. There is not a court date yet set down, so we have yet to see how this will unfold, but 5 charges against an individual and the Ports of Auckland themselves.
Has there been any reaction yet to this news?
I haven't spoken to ports workers, but I have spoken to the Maritime Union, who said this was the first time that they knew of Maritime NZ charging an individual specifically. That was new to them. They were quick to comment that the safety at the Ports of Auckland has changed, they feel, since there's been a change in management. The former CEO, Tony Gibson, has been replaced by interim CEO Wayne Thompson, and the exact words of the union were chalk and cheese. So this relates to quite a different time at the ports. Of course, it isn't the first time that they have faced health and safety charges. Last year they were fined more than $500,000 in regard to some health and safety failings over the death of Laboom Dyer, another stevedore who died when the crane he was in toppled over. So we don't yet know how this will play out, but there are very serious charges here and serious fines that go with them.
Thanks, Nita. That's Nita Blake Person. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei I a Checkpoint, the far north town where house prices are on the up and overcrowded rentals are now the norm. In Fiji, out-of-control COVID leaves some people too scared to go to hospital. And Wellington's new Barkin ride, you won't want to miss this one. Homai o whakaro, we'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. A stay in quarantine could be less arduous in the future as the government reveals its plan to start reopening the border. A trial will get underway between October and November of home isolation or shorter MIQ stays for a select number of travellers. The vaccination program will also be fast-tracked to allow those aged 16 and over to book their first shot from the 1st of September. Meanwhile, the government's COVID-19 business advisor says a lot will ride on the delivery of the vaccine rollout. Rob Fife says the emergence of the Delta variant has been a game changer and it's a good idea to wait until everyone is vaccinated before the country starts opening up. Two small electricity retailers claim Genesis and Contact Energy abused their market dominance, resulting in Monday night's power cuts. Electric Kiwi and Haast Energy are complaining to the industry retailer, saying the companies didn't provide enough power to meet demand. They want the Electricity Authority to declare an undesirable trading situation and reset wholesale prices. Maritime New Zealand has laid charges against the ports of Auckland over the death of a port worker almost a year ago. Father of 7, Pala'amo Kalati, was killed last August after being crushed when a container was dropped during a lifting operation. An individual has also been charged. A police officer who was jailed for raping his colleague while she slept has failed in his bid to take his case to the Supreme Court. Jamie Anthony Foster was sentenced to 6 years in prison after he was convicted of sexual violation and indecent assault over the incident in Kirikiri in February 2019. And a skier has been flown by helicopter to the Twizel Medical Centre after being injured on Aoraki Mount Cook today. A police spokesperson said it was told a person suffered moderate injuries in the Hells Gate area shortly before midday. It's 5:34. More news at 6.
Kia ora rā, e ho no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Kei kōnei Nona Pelsier, mena kaupapa kai Pākehī. Nona is in the studio to kōrero about all things business. Let's start off with this property developer, Precinct Properties. They've reported a 5-fold increase in profit. What's going on?
Okay, so maybe a lot of people might not know, but Precinct Property owns a lot of very expensive property in Auckland and also in Wellington. Amongst the property they own is the Commercial Bay property. And that's a big retail office tower complex at the very bottom of Queen Street.
Upmarket, very upmarket.
And they're also building another one it's going to have the naming rights Deloitte. So it's going to be an office tower in front, and it's going to include a hotel. The company says that last year was a really difficult, challenging period. They lost the valuation of their portfolio dropped by, 60-some million dollars. Now, this year, it gained $283 million, and that is why they made a $180 million net profit for the year ending June, and that was compared with $35 million the year before. So it's basically on the revaluation gains of their portfolio, but also that their properties are almost all fully leased. They are in a very strong position, and they say there's really strong demand. And I asked them about Commercial Bay because
are they charging full rents? I wonder down there as well.
Because
there was obviously difficulties when it first opened. It was right in just after the throes of COVID.
I agree, but the thing is they don't disclose that kind of information in their full year result. However, I did have a chat with Scott Pritchard, who is the chief executive, and I asked him specifically about how Commercial Bay was going, and this is what he had to say.
The ACT will enter into a 7-day lockdown.
The America's Cup really turned things around for the city centre of Auckland. Since then, we've seen really significant growth in the number of people in Commercial Bay. Our pedestrian foot counts are up 40% since March. And what we know is that for every person that goes in the door, they generally spend money. So the more people that sort of make their way into Commercial Bay, the better. So our retailers in the last 3 or 4 months have gone very well. You know, we haven't had a lockdown now since March. So, you know, for every day that extends, people, I think, are getting more and more comfortable with the idea of going into the city, and certainly retailers at Commercial Bay are trading better and better and better each month.
Yeah, so that's Scott Pritchard from Precinct Properties. Now, he said the outlook for this year, which ends in June 2022 is positive. He said that the company has factored in the risk of a potential further lockdown with the variant as it is. So there you go.
Okay. Let's go to the Financial Markets Authority. It's filed High Court proceedings against the chief executive of an NZX-listed company, and this is for alleged market manipulation. Obviously sensitive before the courts, but what can you tell us?
Well, this is a company called New Talesman Gold Mines. He's the managing director of it. Now, what's being alleged is that from the period of 2013 to 2020, this fella, his name is Matthew Jeffrey Hill, made a number of comments about the company under the names of epithermal and bullish. So dozens of them. Now, the actual, what he said has not been disclosed by the FMA. They're taking a civil action against this fellow, not against the company, and it's not a criminal action. The claim has been filed in the High Court, and what's going to, I guess, transpire is we're going to find out what information he shared in these comments that would have potentially influenced an investor decision. That is something that the FMA is very strongly against. They're saying, you should, first of all, you have to disclose if you're the chief executive of a company, you have to disclose to the market if you're making comments about your own company. I don't know exactly what the fellow has been commenting on, but it is over a long period of time and involves dozens and dozens of comments. And the company, the platform it made these comments on is a company called ShareTrader. It's the one who alerted the FMA to the true identity of this person. The FMA is saying, listen, people use social media to gather information. This is also a warning to those types of investors who are looking at social media and using that as their basis for decisions to be cautious.
It's going to have interesting implications for use of those digital platforms. Right, Nona, let's take a gallop around the markets because we're short on time.
I know we are, yeah. So our index fell 0.5%. That gave back all the gains we had from yesterday. That's 66 points drop to 12,681. But I just want to say that Precinct Property share price rose 1.5%, while the New Talesman share price was steady, so nothing changed. Now, interesting, the New Zealand dollar at 70.3 US cents, and that's because the US dollar value dropped somewhat. But we're strong against the Australian at 95.5. We haven't been at that level since November last year, and at 50.7 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with business there. A group of leaky homeowners have been left with more bills to pay after their long-running class action against the cladding giant, James Hardie, failed. A court judgment has found the 144 plaintiffs couldn't prove Hardie Tech's cladding caused their property's water tightness problems. And as Jake McKee reports, the next steps carry a huge price tag.
Wellington resident Meredith Osmond is one of 144 plaintiffs in the so-called Cridge litigation, which began back in 2016. She lived in her leaky Mount Cook home for 19 years after buying it in 2002 when it was just 5 years old.
So we were extremely disappointed and surprised at this outcome. It's been a long, hard slog to get to this point.
She says the plaintiffs funded the legal action themselves before bringing in Claims Funding Australia last year.
As a member of the committee, I'm not going to put a total number, but as an individual, I've probably put 70 to 80,000 into this.
The class action failed because the court decided their case simply didn't stack up. Homeowners and Buyers Association President John Gray says that outcome is tragic for the plaintiffs. He understands there's a number of them who were banking on winning the case to fund the repairs needed on their homes. Mr Gray fears some people will now be left in a financial position where fixing their home isn't viable.
Having failed, the case now means that they are now going to seek or have to seek alternative financing arrangements, and in many cases that will be nigh on impossible.
Mr Gray says the next steps would be expensive, an appeal on top of paying for property repairs and the prospect of having to foot the bill for some of James Hardie's legal costs. James Hardie's lawyer, Jack Hodder QC, says the company hasn't decided if it will be seeking costs.
No, that's a question to be decided after we've had a proper review of the judgment, but it's the normal thing that happens. So you go into a case and as a plaintiff or as a defendant, you defend it or you prosecute it, and at the end of the result, if you lose, then the system provides for costs to follow the event.
Just last week, a similar class action against James Hardie in Auckland, which involved more than 1,000 homeowners, was settled halfway through the trial after the London-based litigation company pulled its funding. Mr Gray says he was dubious of both class actions from the start. His experience with leaky homes cases is similar to the conclusion of this judgment, that fundamental building errors are more likely to blame.
The only cases that we succeeded in hooking James Hardie in as a party to pay for or contribute towards the settlement costs, those situations where the James Hardie technical experts were actually on site with the builders, actually giving them instructions as to how to install the product.
A third class action, known as the Waitakere litigation, is due to be heard in May 2023.
Australia's COVID crisis goes on. This afternoon, Canberra was plunged into a week-long lockdown after the discovery of a new local infection. New South Wales also continues to see high numbers and the spread of the virus beyond Sydney. World Watch's Max Toll has this report.
The ACT will enter into a 7-day lockdown from 5 p.m. tonight.
The hits keep coming in Australia, just one new case in the ACT, but infectious for a time in the community. There's also traces of COVID-19 in the wastewater, and the source is unknown.
This is the most serious public health risk that we have faced in the Territory this year, and really since the beginning of the pandemic. Immediate and significant public health responses are needed to get ahead of this Delta strain.
The Chief Minister of the ACT, Andrew Barr, there delivering the dreaded news to Canberra. For more than 100 days, the Territory has avoided any local cases of COVID-19. Now, people are only allowed out of their homes if they have an essential job, for healthcare, including vaccinations, a limited amount of exercise, and for supermarket shopping. The lockdown announcement has already triggered panic buying at shops. Andrew Barr calling for calm.
What we need is people to come in, get what they need, and leave. This is not an opportunity to go to Bunnings to browse. This is not an opportunity to hang around the local shops. Get in, get what you need, and leave.
And there's no relief in sight for New South Wales. 2 more deaths and 345 new local cases there. Over the past 3 days, the state has seen more than 1,000 new infections. Restrictions in Sydney are clearly not working. Yet the Premier Gladys Berejiklian continues to beat back calls for them to be tightened.
If we get advice to that, of course, New South Wales Government will consider that. At this stage, we're continuing with the approach we have, and we're asking everybody to please do the right thing. We're seeing the front of the virus move forward into these additional communities, and we're just asking everybody to make sure they respect the health orders, do the right thing to protect themselves and their communities.
Several areas outside of Sydney are also in lockdown, the latest restrictions coming after a prisoner was released on bail and drove to Walgett. That's a small northern New South Wales town where he tested positive. Here's the Walgett mayor.
Made his way home. He's got home and they're trying to work out, ascertain how he got home and what route he took to get here. But they've decided to put us into lockdown for 7 days.
Meanwhile, the Australian government has been slammed after it was discovered its online COVID-19 advice for diverse communities, people for whom English isn't their first language. That translated advice was months out of date. Kenneth McCrory, a doctor in Sydney, says the situation is deeply disappointing, and AZ stands for AstraZeneca.
We're at a serious state of despair with the website being way out of date. I've had a look on the website again today. There's messages in different languages, still referring to older targeted advice, still talking about the over 50s for AZ, still talking about Pfizer not being available in GP surgeries, AZ not being available in the pharmacists. We're seeing information with misleading advice about AZ vaccines in a hotspot and recommending for younger individuals as well, which is terribly disappointing.
And today a worrying 21 new cases in Victoria and 10 in Queensland, yet those 10 were already in isolation.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hey, Muriaki ina pita pita kōrero after the news at 6. When will the government's COVID roadmap lead to more tourists on the runway? Bark and Ride is coming to the Wellington cable car. Your canine fur babies will be able to get on board the funicular as part of a month-long trial. But to avoid a potential howler, there are a few conditions. So to explain all, Wellington Cable Car CEO Cesar Piotto joins me now. What's the plan? How are you going to make this work?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, we're opening up the cable car for our four-legged friends, and we're hopeful that with owners bringing their dogs on the cable car, like you said, we've got a couple of quick rules. We're just making sure that all dogs are socialised, all dogs are comfortable being around other dogs or people. No different to taking them on a walk on a busy park on a Saturday morning. We do ask that they use the landings either at the top or at the bottom of the cable car or the area next to the driver's cab, and that'll just help us isolate anyone who's got some allergies to animals so they can continue to travel in a comfortable space. And lastly, we know it's going to happen. There'll be an accident at some point. We are providing some doggy doo-doo kits, so we'll have some disinfectant and some bags. If the owners can clean up after their pets, we'll have a pleasant journey for all involved.
What makes you think there's a demand for this, and why are you doing it? What are you wanting to encourage?
Well, look, really good question. We with more and more people living in the central city here in Wellington, and plans for even greater, migration of people in it, we really want to offer an opportunity for those people to be able to access the best green space, which is the Wellington Botanic Garden. So we feel like we're in a unique opportunity to support the transition to urban living. There is quite a demand. We often get questions through our website, through the ticket terminals, and people are asking about it. And we recently ran a quick survey, and we had over 3/4 of respondents responding positively to dogs travelling on the cable car. So we decided that from the 26th, which is International Dog Day, we'll run a trial for a month. We'll see how it goes. We'll learn some lessons. And if we feel like it's a worthwhile activity, we'll continue through and see where it takes us.
Now, people who are listening to us rather than watching will be missing out on some fantastic photos of a dog that's had a crack on the cable car. So have you run a trial, put a dog on there, and how did it work? How did the dog react?
Yeah, look, a couple of weeks ago we were closed for our annual maintenance shutdown, and we had a few of our favourite pooches, some of our staff dogs, come on, and they came for a ride. The cable car moves at 4 metres a second, which is about 15, 16 kilometres an hour. So it's not very fast. It doesn't stop abruptly. It didn't seem to bother Pablo or Millie, which is the photos that you're referring to. And they were quite happy. Even in the light show in the tunnels, they didn't seem bothered at all. So part of the trial, Lisa, is really to figure out, is this unique to Pablo and Millie, or are all of our, four-legged friends, are they happy to travel on it?
So do you have to buy a ticket for your dog? What's the deal?
Yep. There'll be a $2 ticket. Now, during the trial, we've teamed up with SPCA, and we're going to donate all of the proceeds to them and to support the amazing work that they do. If the trial is successful and will continue, there'll still be a $2 ticket, but that will come back to the cable car and help us fund the clean-up process and some further improvements that we want to make.
So, okay, it's a month-long trial. How soon after that do you reckon you'll be able to make a decision on whether this is a goer?
Look, we're hopeful that we'll be able to make a decision right towards the end of the trial. It really depends on what we encounter through the 4 weeks, but everything's pointing to a positive trial, and then we can keep rolling straight after that.
Thanks for joining us. That is Cesar Piotto, who is the CEO of Wellington Cable Car there. So for a month, you'll be able to take your dog on that outside of peak hours. It's a trial, $2 to have a crack, and the money goes to the SPCA while the trial is underway. In Fiji, some people are too scared to go to hospital as the country's COVID situation continues to spiral. The Delta variant is also causing major problems for the healthcare system, with more than 500 cases and 13 deaths in the last 24 hours. RNZ Pacific reporter Alicia Foon has more.
Fiji has gone from containment to mitigation in the hope of slowing the spread of the virus. Former Health Minister Dr. Neil Sharma says he lost 4 seniors to COVID-19 last week, and the Delta variant is causing major problems clinically. He says people in Fiji are confused, and information from health officials isn't reaching most of the general public.
In a high-risk situation like this, I think they're doing the right thing for their own people, and we've got to get our act together, that's all. We have no adequate communication between the government, NGOs, faith-based organizations, so everybody's doing their own thing. And as a result, we're facing such a pantomime out here.
A New Zealand-based Fiji community group, Fiji Gidmit Foundation President Krish Naidu, says some people are too afraid to even go to hospital.
There is a fear in Fiji. People don't want to go to the hospitals as well because they feel they're not going to come back. And we know a few cases last week where people went to the hospital and they got put in the COVID ward and they passed away. And the families insist that they didn't have COVID. So it's kind of very confusing.
317 people have died from COVID-19 in Fiji, including a baby and teenager. 3 of those who died were fully vaccinated. Authorities are continuing to urge people to have confidence in vaccinations, reminding people it takes time to kick in. Meanwhile, from midnight Sunday, only New Zealand citizens, their partners and children can travel from Fiji to New Zealand under certain conditions. Fiji's Health Secretary Dr. James Fong says he understands New Zealand's decision to protect itself from the virus and agrees the situation is dire.
I accept that that's their perspective. It's obvious to the world that we are in a bad state. We have the highest number of cases per million. The number of deaths that we have had is also high when you compare it globally.
Krish Naidu says he's shocked at how quickly it's all happening.
I know some of the people are already in Fiji and they've gone to visit families. All of a sudden, they find themselves caught in between trying to come back home as quickly as possible, but also trying to manage these MIQ challenges that every traveller has to go through. Yeah, this is just a double whammy. It's like people are always looking for positive stories to come out from this crisis, but it's just getting worse every day. And this is a signal and a shift towards more uncertainty and distress for the community.
Mr. Naidu says the move sends a strong message to the Fijian government that their pandemic response is failing. But despite this, Health Minister Dr. James Fong continues to stand by his stance on a lockdown, saying it won't work.
At the moment, no, I can't see how we will achieve any form of elimination through a lockdown. I can't see that. I can only ensure that the disease does not get out of Viti Levu. If we do another lockdown, we will not be able to restrict movement in residential lots. There's huge amounts of communal living. It's going to be difficult trying to force people to stay home and not actually engage with each other in areas that are difficult to police.
There have been 568 new cases and 13 deaths in the latest 24-hour reporting period.
Burnt out and underpaid midwives say mothers and babies could be hurt if conditions in the sector don't improve. About 150 midwives and supporters marched to Parliament today, with midwives walking off the job in Wellington, Nelson and Marlborough as part of rolling strike action this week. Our reporter Hamish Cardwell and cameraman Samuel Rillstone were there.
What do we want?
A pay plea from midwives. This midwife, who RNZ has agreed not to name, says work conditions are simply unbearable.
It's killing me. I am so stressed. I'm so close to burning out. I'm almost in tears talking about it. We are short-staffed all the time. I hardly ever get a break. I used to do 12-hour shifts.
She says the DHB's latest pay offer is insulting. Hutt Valley midwife Anna Berry says the stress and long hours are brutal, forcing her to quit a previous job.
I have absolutely personally suffered intense burnout, so I actually had to leave. The burnout was so real that I actually had to leave. I was suffering chronic nausea from stress.
Anna Berry says sometimes she was the only midwife on a ward and fears mothers and babies could be hurt if conditions don't improve.
I absolutely think that there's already examples of women who feel neglected on ward. I certainly feel that women feel that they're being discharged too early. They feel that, they stay an extra night for breastfeeding assistance and they just actually don't end up getting the breastfeeding assistance.
The Midwives Union Meris rejected the DHB's latest offer, saying it was worse than 2 previous deals already rejected by members. Jill Ovens from the union says the parties agree on a number of issues, except the money.
And that's been so problematic because the DHBs are taking a very hard line position, ridiculously hard line, but also they're hamstrung because they're not the ones making the decisions. The Ministry of Health and other layers of bureaucracy and government above them are hamstringing them to the point where they come and they cannot negotiate.
Wellington Region mother of two Meg Waghorn is heavily involved with parenting groups. She says the lack of government support for midwives is turning parents against them.
And I want to say to Labor, you are losing women on this issue. I am really active in parenting spaces online, and I'm noticing a shift. And it's because women have had enough. We don't control the money, and we just want you guys to get it done. We cannot lose another midwife in our community.
The Health Minister Andrew Little spoke briefly, with no news about new money to settle with the DHBs.
What I can say is we're totally committed to seeing through the pay equity claim. We're at the point where we can begin negotiations in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and as the Speaker before said, we've just got to get it done.
He says there are plans to recruit more staff. DHBs say their latest offer includes a nearly $6,000 salary boost to be paid in a year and an immediate $6,000 lump sum payment. A pay equity agreement is also being finalised, which would likely see pay increases. The DHBs say it is a good offer given the economic circumstances, and it is disappointed the union did not let midwives vote on it before walking off the job. However, the union says members knew the details of the proposal. It says if a better offer is not forthcoming, there will be a nationwide strike next Thursday.
And to your feedback, and lots of it is coming in around the government's roadmap to reconnecting, as they call it, to the rest of the world. And this idea that some businesses will take part in a trial that they can go into self-isolation rather than managed isolation. This person says, how can we allow vaccinated travellers to skip isolation when vaccinations do not prevent transmission? Frank says, self-isolation? ? Hell, even a small minority in MIQ breached the facility. All it takes is one irresponsible fool who thinks the rules don't apply to them. And COVID is an uninvited guest. This will not go well. Another listener says, we're so fortunate that everyone in New Zealand will have the best vaccine available in the time frame that was forecast. It seems to be going to plan, and we are all safe. Patience needed. Another person who seems quite keen on getting on board the trial, Amit, says, I could isolate at home as I live in my own house, willing to pay up to $500 for government compliance costs, in addition to a refundable bond. If you stick by the rules, you get the money back. Electronic bracelet to ensure rules are adhered to is a no-brainer.
RNZ News at 6, I'm Marama Tipole. New Zealanders are being told the country can't afford to keep the borders closed until everyone has had a COVID vaccine. The government has laid out a plan to start allowing quarantine-free travel from early next year. It wants as many people as possible to be immunised before that, but the COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, has told Checkpoint border changes will go ahead.
We have to start doing that. We can't wait for people who are indicating that they aren't going to take up the opportunity to be vaccinated. We can't wait for them indefinitely. We need to give them a reasonable opportunity to learn about the vaccine, to get vaccinated. But we're not going to be able to stay in the position that we're in now indefinitely.
The government's COVID-19 business advisor, Rob Fife, says it's crucial the vaccine rollout goes to plan if border restrictions are to be relaxed. Mr Fife says a lot now rides on the delivery of the vaccine program.
I'd rate our intent and our strategy at an 8, probably out of 10. I think our execution has probably been a 5 or 6 out of 10, and I think we need to nail this next phase.
Rob Fife says the emergence of the Delta variant has been a game changer, and he'd rather wait a little longer to get everyone vaccinated before the country starts opening up. Christchurch City Councillors have reversed their decision to slash the number of seats in the city's new multi-million-dollar arena. The council met again today to make a final decision on the capacity of the Canterbury multi-use arena after it was revealed the 30,000-seat option would cost an extra $50 million rather than the $88 million originally thought. Councillors voted by majority this afternoon to backtrack on an earlier decision. Its call to trim the number of seats to 25,000 sparked anger anger among some residents and spurred an online petition. That petition, signed by more than 24,000 people, was presented to councillors this afternoon. Councillor Sam McDonald, who pushed for the decision to be reversed, says residents were calling out for a bigger stadium in the city.
It's been 2 weeks of real frustration from the community that we potentially didn't get a decision right. It is in no way being generated by us. This is a community groundswell from the public, and I think we do need to be cognizant of that.
Maritime New Zealand has laid charges against the ports of Auckland over the death of a port worker almost a year ago. Father of 7, Bala'amo Kalati, was killed last August after being crushed when a container was dropped during a lifting operation. Sarah Robson reports.
Maritime New Zealand says it's filed charges in the Auckland District Court today. The port company faces 3 charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. One of the charges carries a maximum penalty of a fine of $3 million. Another carries a maximum fine of $1.5 million. An individual who hasn't been named is facing 2 charges. No court dates have yet been set.
More than 100 owners of leaky homes say they didn't expect to lose their case against cladding giant James Hardie. A High Court judgment says the 144 plaintiffs failed to prove the Hardie-Tex cladding system caused their properties weather tightness problems. Plaintiff Meredith Osmond says the group was confident they could win the case.
Absolutely a committed, tight, functioning group took this action based on sound legal advice. So, we're looking at where we go from here.
James Hardie ANZ Country Manager John Arneil says the ruling supports the company's belief that it behaved responsibly. Canberra is the latest Australian state to go into lockdown with a new COVID-19 case detected in the community. There are traces of the virus in the city's wastewater, but it's not known who is infected. From tonight, residents will only be able to leave their homes in the next week for essential reasons. The ACT's Chief Minister Andrew Barr is calling for calm as panic buying sets in.
What we need is people to come in, get what they need and leave. This is not an opportunity to go to Bunnings to browse. This is not an opportunity to hang around the local shops. Get in, get what you need and leave.
It had previously been more than 100 days since the last locally acquired case in the Australian Capital Territory. A skier who broke their leg on Aoraki Mount Cook today has been successfully taken off the mountain. A group of 7 skiers activated a beacon this morning in the Hells Gate area. The Rescue Coordination Centre says the injured person has been successfully flown to the Twizel Medical Centre. It says a second helicopter will take the skier to Christchurch Hospital. It's 6:05. To sports now, Wallabies coach Dave Rennie has brought Marika Koroibete straight back into the Australian starting 15 for Saturday's second Bledisloe Cup test at Eden Park. The winger was stood down from the first test after breaking team curfew. Rennie says it was a simple decision to recall Koroibete because he rates him amongst the best players in the world.
Yeah, obviously incredibly quick, very physical. He's not a big man, but he's made of concrete. So he hits hard and he carries hard, and phenomenal work ethic and work rates. His numbers are outrageous.
The All Blacks have rearranged their backline for the second test, with midfield back Anton Leonard-Brown sidelined with a knee injury. Rieko Ioane has moved from the wing to centre, with Sevu Reece switching to the left flank, and a fit again Will Jordan is back on the right wing. All Whites Chris Wood and Winston Reid could miss the opening round of English football's Premier League this weekend following their return from the Olympics. Burnley only see Wood as a hopeful starter against Brighton and Hove Albion, while Reid hasn't returned to training with West Ham after suffering a knee injury in Japan. Reid was on loan at Brentford last season and helped them gain promotion to the Premier League, but is now back with the Hammers. And Tokyo bronze medalist Lydia Ko is one of 32 Olympians who will line up at the Scottish Open tonight. It's the last warm-up event for next week's final golf major of the year, the British Open. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our changing world is looking for birds in the bush, 40 of them. Robins recently released into a Manawatu reserve. Silver Tambra is on the line from Estonia. Dean Whiting is getting to grips with our Maori heritage. And Space Base co-founder Emmeline Pat Dahlstrom on how satellites might help us to dig ourselves out of the hole we seem to be creating around climate change on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday, Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Partly cloudy with isolated showers, turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine, a few showers for tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough, Nelson, Canterbury Plains and Christchurch. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers tonight. A period of rain tomorrow morning, then scattered showers. However, becoming fine in Nelson and Canterbury. Bulla and Westland, showers turning to rain this evening with heavy falls. Rain easing to showers early tomorrow. Canterbury High Country, Otago and Southland, cloudy with rain this evening and severe northwest gales in exposed places, becoming fine tomorrow. For Fiordland, periods of rain, heavy for a time today with severe northwest gales in exposed places, easing this evening. And for our friends in their Kohu Chatham Islands, mainly fine with rain later tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The tourism industry is welcoming a new roadmap to reopen Aotearoa's borders next year while preparing for more tough times ahead. Today, the Prime Minister announced the immediate focus is to ramp up the vaccination rollout and then look to a phased reopening of the border once there's good coverage. The new border system will be based on low, medium and high-risk entry paths, kicking in from early next year. Tourism operators told our reporter Tess Brunton some clarity is much appreciated, but many will remain in survival mode until the planes begin touching down.
Vaccines, border testing, monitoring of symptoms when you travel will eventually become our baseline, and we will get used to it. Our goal as New Zealanders to get to that place as quickly as we can with as little health and economic disruption as we can.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern outlining the brave new world when international travel seems less of a pipe dream. The plan includes speeding up the vaccination rollout this year and allowing those vaccinated to start travelling again at the beginning of next year as part of a risk-based pathway system of travel. She describes it as a careful and deliberate approach.
Rushing could see us in the situation many other countries are finding themselves in, where after sustained periods of case numbers falling due to vaccination, they're finding them rise again after relaxing their settings and opening their borders. So our plan is to reopen in a phased way, where we assess and check before we take each step.
Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive, Chris Roberts, says the plan is no quick fix, but it could set the country up well in the long term.
Really pleased to see the trial that's going to begin in October for New Zealanders to make short trips overseas and not have to come back to MIQ. That's not an immediate tourism benefit to New Zealand, but it does test our border processes, and the payoff will be, if that trial works really well, then next year we will be able to bring in people from low-risk countries without putting them into MIQ, and that's when the opportunities will come for tourism.
He's expecting some pent-up demand from vaccinated travellers.
I think most travellers will believe that travelling to New Zealand is a safe option and probably one of the safest that there is anywhere in the world. But what will that travel journey look like? How many requirements will be in place, and will it be worth the effort? That will be the question would-be travellers will be asking themselves.
In Rotorua, Te Puia Chief Executive Tim Cossa isn't surprised by the border reopening timeframe.
I'm pretty comfortable that the position is keep us safe, get us all vaccinated as best we can, and then start to open ourselves up to the world as we progressively go forward. But don't do it in a rush. Do it as a progressive thing. Carefully manage it and carefully manage the rebuild of tourism, really.
He's predicting it will take some time for travel confidence to rebuild. Totally Tourism boss Mark Quickfall says Fortress New Zealand can't last forever, so a border plan will help them to prepare. But he isn't expecting an easy road to recovery.
Looking ahead, we just having to accept that when we move out of winter into summer, it will be quieter again, and that's concerning. We were hoping that the Australians would be travelling, but certainly between now and 2022, it's going to be pretty tough going for the tourism industry in general. So, no, it's a matter of, once again, hanging in there and just riding this out.
He says there is work to be done before the border is reopened.
Our first plan for tourism needs to be
that we allow businesses to reset. And as I said, there'll be a number that will disappear potentially if this drags on for too long. Then we need to recover, we need to rebuild, and then we need to reconnect.
Vaccinations will be open to all eligible ages from the 1st of September, and it's only once jabs are in arms that the drawbridge can begin to be winched down.
Businesses are queuing up to be part of a pilot scheme allowing vaccinated travelling workers to self-isolate at home. It's part of the government's roadmap to relaxing border restrictions by the first quarter of next year. Te Piri Mayor Jacinda Ardern says the trial will be very limited with strict conditions and monitoring. The companies involved will be named and the travel must be essential to maintaining their business. The pilot's expected to start in October. Export New Zealand's Executive Director Catherine Baird joins me now. Catherine, did the roadmap meet your expectations?
Look, really fantastic to see it announced. There's been a lot of pent-up desire for this. Obviously, exporters have done incredibly well to really keep their businesses going over a year and a half of no travel. So, and some of them are critical businesses and that they've got, really strategic things they need to be travelling for. So there's definitely a list of those businesses that we know about who would be very keen to participate in trials.
Yeah, so what's the deal? Form an orderly queue now. What kind of demand do you reckon from within your members there will be?
Yeah, well, look, we've been sending through a few that we think are special cases because, they have had sort of urgent need to be overseas. And they're not just around trade shows, they're things like, sometimes particularly manufacturers who are doing quite big bits of kit have to go and install it. And those are high value jobs. And for a small to medium sized business, that could make or break your business really. So there are a number of companies in that kind of category.
Catherine, any idea of numbers? Because, the criteria that's been set out by the Prime Minister today is they need to be fully vaccinated. The need to travel has to be linked to maintaining their business. Essential, not just a couple of weeks away from New Zealand. So with the companies that you've been dealing with, what kind of numbers do you reckon would actually meet those base markers for trying to get into the pilot?
Look, we've always maintained it's not a huge number, whether it's like 100 or a couple of hundred. Obviously there's businesses that just want to get away to do trade shows and that kind of thing, but we've definitely got some that we think have a really strong case because it's, quite critical projects. So I think it wouldn't be too hard to get a decent list. Obviously the government's probably going to want to ensure that they are the size of business that has good processes and procedures and good health and safety and all of that kind of thing. So I think they'll be wanting businesses that are, look well established and trustworthy and have a good track record. I'm sure that will all play into it. But there'll be plenty of demand. We're starting to get emails already.
Catherine, it won't surprise you, as soon as we started talking about this story, we started getting emails too from our listeners and texts, and they are really sceptical about people's ability to comply with the rules if they're isolating at home. How much confidence and trust do you have in business to, follow the letter of the law, because they could blow it for everybody?
Oh, look, totally, and I'm sure the government will take into account when those businesses are chosen, so they'll have good track records and good health and safety approaches. And, the businesses themselves, they've got brand reputation to protect, so and they don't want to muck it up, not only for themselves but for everybody else. So I think there'll be a high degree of caution and rigour. We've had businesses approaching us saying, look, we've got to send people overseas, and a lot of them have. And really they wanted early vaccines because they didn't want to put their people at risk. So people have been able to get out of the country, they just haven't been able to get back in.
The Prime Minister has indicated, well, she did today, that she's going to name the companies. What do you think that would add to it?
Well, obviously that gives a whole lot of transparency and reputational risk as well. So I'm sure that's why they'll be doing it. So those companies know that they're in the public gaze and they need to play with a straight bat and play by the rules and be super safe.
The other condition is that whoever gets this opportunity to participate in the pilot, they need to be able to isolate entirely away from family, right? No shared facilities. And again, some of the questions we're getting, is this something for the privileged, for those who have a second home or there's a company batch to stay at? Is this a scheme for the elite?
Look, probably in the early days of COVID when some businesses were still travelling and they had people overseas they had to get back, they were doing things like, hiring Airbnb or hiring apartments and that kind of thing. So, if the value of the job is big enough and important enough to the company's bottom line, putting staff up in an Airbnb or something on their own is not a huge cost, really.
In terms of the accelerated vaccination program, right, the government's put the call out from the 1st of September. Anyone who wants a vaccination can get in the queue to get one. And when we get enough people vaccinated, we will be able to relax some of the rules. Are you clear what enough people is, Catherine?
Well, I think that the strategy seems to have been a bit deliberately vague about that. And I think maybe there's some psychology around that of, if you target 80%, then 20% think that they don't have to do it and everyone else will do it for them. Whose approach is right, I don't know. I mean, Australia has set targets, and I guess we'll all look back on this and in hindsight will be a great thing and we'll figure out what was the best strategy. But let's hope we get a really high vaccination rate. I think the UK is actually highly protected, but it's partly that a lot of people have actually had COVID-19. So their combination of vaccinated people plus people who've been sick and recovered means that they've got a pretty high level of protection.
Good to talk to you, Catherine. That's Catherine Baird, who's Export New Zealand's Executive Director. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The housing crisis is hitting Kaikooi so badly, residents say overcrowding is now the norm. It's one of the few places in New Zealand with a median house price below $300,000, increasing buyer interest from out of town but reducing the rental pool. Sam Ollie reports from Te Tai Tokerau.
Renters, real estate agents and runanga leaders alike, they're all worried about how whānau are making do. While house prices in Kaikohe remain some of the cheapest in the country, they've risen 22% in the last year, yet in the last census, the median annual income was just $19,000. New figures from the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand out today show Northland was one of 2 regions that saw an increase on sales volumes in the last year. Kaikohe real estate agent Sandra Robinson says families losing long-term rentals to new owners are having to squeeze in elsewhere in town.
These old health issues start popping up again that arise from overcrowding. And of course then that puts pressure on the house, puts pressure on everything, the whole shebang.
Te Hau Ora o Ngāpuhi Chief Executive Te Ropu Poa says there are so few houses available in Kaikohe that whānau put up with substandard homes or split up to avoid sleeping in cars or motels, and those hoping to own their own home in the town are being priced out. She employs 94 staff and estimates less than 20% own the house they live in.
So they've been in KiwiSaver, they've ticked all the boxes that the system wants them to comply with, now can't afford a shithole in Kaikohe. So I want to build them their brand new homes for them and their families, to create that asset for whānau in terms of future, because you can't get your grandparents' house or your parents' house, they don't own them anymore.
Te Hau Ora o Ngāpuhi is planning a multi-million-dollar housing development in Kaikohe to ease the pressure. Ms Poa reckons iwi could do a better job than government agencies like the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and Kāinga Ora if they had the same resources. And she isn't afraid to tell visiting public servants that.
What he said to me was, it's amazing, we can build 5 new houses in Kaikohe over the next 12 months. I said, wow. So he hasn't talked to me since.
Data from the 2018 census showed dwellings in Northland were the dampest in the country. In Kaikohe specifically, 40% of households had significant mould. This renting mother told RNZ her home should have been in a better condition when she moved in, but there is nowhere else she can go if she kicks up a fuss.
Well, I got a 4-bedroom and it's really cold as, especially for my kids and all that, and it's winter.
This renter said tightened tenancy laws backfired for her last year.
If they were to fix it, the rent was to go up. So I'm pretty much was living on enough to pay what I was paying, but once I heard that, I moved out.
The Whakamana Mai Whānau Trust in Kaikohe has started renting out portable cabins for Māori land. The Whare to the Whenua scheme has been used by about 200 family members since it started last year. The trust also rents out rooms above its office on the main street. Leader Rhonda Zielinski-Toki says she is contacted by people in need on a daily basis.
It feels sometimes like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, you know. You have these people come in and we feel morally convicted to try and find a solution. And some of the families we work with, they're hard families, you know. They don't have good credit ratings, they don't have a lot of income, they might have prior things that are challenges or barriers, but they still deserve to be clean and dry and warm.
Similarly, not-for-profit Ngā Whetū o Te Wā Kaikohe has set up a base to start building prefabricated cabins for whānau that can easily meet consent standards. Director Paul Wihongi expects they will be priced from $10,000.
We're not here for the money. I know there's a whole lot of money to be made in housing, but that's not our focus. Our focus is about making good, healthy homes for our whānau and anybody else who wants one.
For those who can't afford to upgrade the house they own, Healthy Homes Tai Tokero installs subsidised insulation. Operations manager Haka Bristow has lived the problem.
I was born and raised in a tin shack, sort of, no running water, no power. So I understand how they're living, but to see them 30 years on from where I came from and people still living like that, it is quite sad.
But that's what drives her mahi.
Just to give their family something and coming out, even though it's a stinking job, getting bashed up around by the piles or your hair's getting caught in the nails or the timber or something like that. It's worth it after you come out and you look at the family and they've got smiles from ear to ear. They're so thankful. The appreciation behind it, it's awesome.
Haka Bristow's team takes referrals from across the region through the DHB, online applications and word of mouth to improve the existing stock until better homes are built from scratch.
To France, where people now have to prove their COVID vaccination and health status before entering cafes or using long-distance transport. The Health Pass law has provoked weekly protests from those who say it breaches fundamental freedoms. But as BBC's Lucy Williamson reports, many support the French government's way of getting society back to normal.
Well, this new law in France seems like the perfect opportunity to wander down to this little bar just around the corner from the Paris bureau, and a bit of a favourite. I can see just walking up outside the door here, there's a sign telling everyone to prepare their health pass. And inside, it's Eloise on duty today.
I didn't have rebellious people, I didn't have people, saying it's a scandal. Most people had it, and some of them, had to run to the local chemist to get the test done, so they could have lunch with their friends. So
I love the fact that people are literally running to the chemist to get a test, so they can come to the bar.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Well, so they can stay with their friends. I had a bunch of people saying it's either the 5 of us or none of us. And I was like, if one of you, doesn't have the health pass to prove, that he can sit at the table, I cannot take you.
And have you been vaccinated?
I will have my second injection, then I'm going to have to wait for my pass. So I'm actually in the same situation.
Yes, you heard that right. The same restaurant staff, now obliged to demand a health pass from customers, don't yet have to have one themselves. Under the new law, they have until the end of August to get vaccinated. Healthcare workers have until the middle of October. It's not just bars, restaurants and cultural venues that are covered by the new law. You also now need proof of vaccination, immunity or a negative test to attend routine hospital appointments, visit a retirement home or board an aeroplane or an intercity train. Outside the Gare du Nord, views were mixed.
For restaurants and cafe, I think it's a bit too much. But in public transport, I think it's like showing your ticket. It doesn't bother me.
I think it's perfectly normal. It was the only solution to get people moving again.
Now, for more on the biggest transfer in world football, perhaps ever, having completed his move from FC Barcelona, Lionel Messi has been unveiled at his new club, Paris Saint-Germain. The 34-year-old already has a full trophy case, but insists he's got plenty left in the tank. The BBC's Patrick Geary has more on how Messi became perhaps the greatest footballer of all time.
Rosario, Santa Fe, Argentina, and the unassuming home of a genius. You can still find Lionel Messi's mark here, but the more indelible impression he's left in this place was the way he played football.
He did the same things at 12 years of age as he does today, in a different setting and in different stadiums, but he was exactly the same. Leo completely absorbed everything you threw his way. I've got goosebumps. He was the real deal.
While Messi was developing rapidly as a player, his body wasn't keeping pace. He was diagnosed with a growth hormone deficiency aged 10. From 12, he'd be injecting himself every night.
You need it to grow normally. If you don't have growth hormone or you don't have enough growth hormone, you will not grow. All your genetics are decided for you to grow. The treatment is to replace growth hormone by injections. If you know any diabetic person that injects himself insulin, this is a very similar kind of device to inject growth hormone.
Not only was that a tough regime for a child, it was also hugely expensive. Amid an economic crisis in Argentina, his family headed to Catalonia to find Lionel a club. Barcelona signed him up and funded the rest of his treatment, and his new teammates knew they were playing alongside someone special.
He makes you better. He makes everyone around him better. And as I said, you can throw him a bomb and he will make it good. I mean, he's surrounded by 3-4 players, but he has got the capacity to get away from it or play you a 1-2 in a difficult position. He is so unpredictable. That's what makes him so good.
Your feedback now, and there's still lots of it coming in on this roadmap, the COVID roadmap, on isolating at home, a trial for business. This person says, I wonder how the self-isolation is going to work. Folk have to get home first, possibly via a few domestic airports, public transport, shuttle, taxi, Uber, or someone from the family picking the traveller up. I think it's much more realistic to house these travellers for a few days until a few negative tests come through. Other people are saying, why does business get to go first? My daughter, who's a registered nurse living in Melbourne, wants to come home to live. She can self-isolate in a rental, is fully vaccinated. We need nurses. And another person says, excellent. So now the boomers are vaccinated. The rest of us get to be experimented with and put at risk. So predictable. That is all we've got time for. Nights and Lately will keep you posted throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō from 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. First up looks at how different life will be for people who have been vaccinated compared to those who haven't.
And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. Now, normally we'd be getting the news headlines, but for some reason we are not. So I'm guessing that's because there's some problem with the line, because normally the news headlines come out of Auckland, and I'm in Wellington. So apologies for that, but in the meantime I can tell you that we've got another edition of Nights coming up after the news at 7. My first guest is Emmeline Pat Dahlstrom from Space. She's the co-founder of that Canterbury-based space technology firm. And tonight we're going to be talking about a challenge that she and other members of the New Zealand space community have set up. It's a climate space challenge, encouraging particularly people who are university students or high school students to think about using space technology in a way that might help us find out more information about what's happening with the climate. Because the more we know, the more we can prepare for it and maybe mitigate it. That's coming up after the news at 7. In this half hour later on, we'll have another report from the House on the inner workings of Parliament. But first off, here's a detail.
chest pain, the heart palpitations, the dizziness, the tingling, your body's going numb in different parts.
Some who caught the virus early on are still grappling with the long-term effects.
I'd walk to the letterbox, I'd stop and I'd rest, I'd come back, and that was it. I'd sit down for an hour.
A group of around 200 Kiwis suffer what is known as long COVID. They call themselves the long haulers.
And no one can tell you anything, no one can help you.
This week, the world passed 204 million cases of COVID-19 and 4.3 million deaths. 183 million people have recovered. But have they really?
Early international research has shown as many as 30% of COVID patients develop ongoing complications. A Kiwi study is still working on the rates here.
They're now loosely saying either 1 in 10 or as much as 1 in 3 will suffer long-term consequences from having had COVID.
An urgent study is seeking to understand the long-term effects COVID-19's had on some New Zealand sufferers. The post-viral condition, known as long COVID, has been described by the World Health Organization as a global burden.
Long COVID is the crushing avalanche of a health problem that the world is only just beginning to realise is about to hit. Profound fatigue is one of the most common symptoms, but far from the only one. You may think you've recovered from the virus, you relapse, and it doesn't seem to matter if you just had a mild case or a severe one. Young or old, fit or not, it doesn't seem to discriminate. Sufferers here believe New Zealand, with its low COVID infection rates, is ideally placed to study its effects. They say they can't wait for the government to dish out research grants and are trying to raise money to privately fund research now. I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, I'm talking to a University of Auckland researcher who's making some interesting connections between the virus and Parkinson's disease, and to New Zealand's poster girl for long COVID.
I had that on my CV for my career dreams and aspirations, to be stopped in the street by random people. You're the COVID girl.
Aucklander Janine Crossan is the face of a group of about 250 COVID long haulers. She caught the virus early back in March last year, and it's absolutely battered her immune system. I asked her why she's putting herself forward in the fight to get some help.
Certainly not fame, notoriety or money. It doesn't help for any of those things. It's a great way to make friends with anti-vaxxers who love to pop their heads up.
Great.
I feel like I have a certain level of responsibility, I guess, in that I've been in media for a long time. I've been running my own businesses for a long time. I sit in a position of privilege to be able to help. And if I look around my group, they haven't had that same level of training.
Janine sounding a heck of a lot better than she did last year when RNZ caught up with her.
Sorry.
This was Janine Crossan's raspy cough as she lay in her North Shore hospital bed after being diagnosed with COVID-19 10 months ago. She struggled to catch a breath as she spoke to Checkpoint on March the 21st, just days before New Zealand went into level 4 lockdown.
It's just all here, and of course the coughing is making my esophagus just raw, and yeah.
Janine says the 4 days she spent in hospital was among the most traumatising experiences of her life.
It still does scare me, yeah. I can only read the news for a certain amount of times a week, otherwise I get too overwhelmed by it. It's quite traumatic, the whole watching and waiting and hoping things aren't going to get worse, feeling in you know, very much, sorry, I lose words, I can't think of the ones I want to use, very much that things are going to get worse again, and I have to be careful not to catastrophise things in my own head too because of that trauma. So I just walk myself back a bit and go and pretend it doesn't exist and just put my feet on the beach at Piha.
Well, it is a very, you know, it's a unique thing, isn't it? It's a disease that's been so documented. There's thousands of pieces of research emerging on it all the time. An avalanche of information's coming out. I guess it can be overwhelming.
Especially when every person points them to me. So and everybody comes from the bless their cotton socks. They're sending them for the right intent, but every person who comes across every piece sends them to me as direct messages or emails or whatever else format that they can come across, and it is quite a lot. And normally, when they discover something, I'm the first person they tag in, or they're getting into a fight with an anti-vaxxer, I'm the first person they tag in. A lot of them are really scared to come out, and I don't blame them. The bullying is pretty substantial, and most of them are suffering from their community or their